Hi, it's Jared from Strong Roots Farm. We're back with another cattle grazing video. Today we're going to talk about 2 points. The main thing I'm going to talk about today is back grazing. What is back grazing, and should you be back grazing? Should you allow back grazing? That's going to be the main point, but I want to talk a little bit about overgrazing and what that is because they kind of fit together a little bit. Stick around, I'll take you through it all. Hopefully give you some helpful knowledge here because there's some differences for us on different times of the season. So I want to go over that, and then you'll figure out why or what we allow when it comes to back grazing. Stick around. Welcome back, thanks for joining us. We're gonna move some cows here. So they have been grazing. You can see the line right here. They're grazing over here. They're gonna go into a new paddock. A paddock, I had this question on a video. So a paddock is just a separated section of our farm that we allow them to graze at a certain point in time. It's different from strip grazing where you graze in a line, small strips. It's usually a larger square, but it's simply a segmented part of your farm that you graze for a determined amount of time, sometimes daily grazing, sometimes every other day, sometimes you move the wire twice a week, whatever your situation would be. So we're gonna move these in, I'll let you see that, and then we'll get on to the video. Come on, cows. All right, we got the calves over here grazing. This is the stocker herd. And in fact, now, as of last week, we are officially a stocker farm only. No more cows, no more bull. We've got everything gone. Our last calves went to butcher this past weekend. And so we only have a stocker herd. Now there's only 6 here, but the rest of them are all back up at the barn. We are bringing in new calves to fill this farm with nothing but calves here on this 30 acres. Now, why we're doing that, that's a whole different video. But today, as we talk about back grazing, they're grazing, the stocker herd is grazing in a new paddock, new strip of grass. And so technically everything here behind me would be considered back grazing. So this has all been grazed. Now, the furthest point back, so we've worked our way across this, the furthest point back here is over a week and a half now. We're at like 12 days, they started grazing back there because there was only 10 of them out here. And the lightest one out here is about 600 right now. We took some 1,000 pounders, 1,100 pounders to the butcher. And then we've got new 5 weights, 4 and 5 weights up at the house. So when you look back there, they could technically back graze to something that's 12 days old. And for us, that's a big no-no certain times of the year. So to know when you should or should not back graze, or should you ever back graze, I guess it's more important to learn first why we don't or do back graze. So we're gonna go check the water down here, but obviously not everybody thinks this way. There are well over 80% of the farms in America, cow-calf farms or stocker farms, that simply let them open graze, which means the cattle have full reign of the entire farm, whether that's half the farm here or they graze a period at one farm and then they move them to another farm. Some farms never rotate, so they are continually back grazing, and they call that open grazing. We rotationally graze, so we segregate off these paddocks, or we strip graze, or we do different things, and then we don't want them to come back to where they've already grazed. Why is that? But we don't want them grazing an area that is ready for regrowth. Meaning down here, where we grazed 12 days ago, once they were done grazing, we want it to recoup. We want it to regrow grass so that we can graze it again in another portion of the season. So we grazed it, we moved them off, and we don't back graze so that this ground now has rest and time to regrow grass. So that's one major reason people don't back graze. Another reason people don't back graze is because when they were grazing here, they dropped manure, right? And with that, there's parasites and flies and all the pestilence that comes along with that. So you don't back graze to move your cattle away from the fly larva droppings, away from any parasites that could come and build up in the soil, and to prevent the overgrazing, which is really where you get most of your parasites. So we need to now talk about overgrazing. Now there are many different definitions to overgrazing, and we've got more to talk about on back grazing here in a minute, but there are many different definitions on this. And so the standard definition that I have gone by when it comes to overgrazing is I allow the ground adequate rest time before regrazing. Meaning I graze this off and it gets at minimum 30 days. We would like 60 to 90 days of regrowth or rest on this portion of ground before we would regraze it. You can tell if it's had enough rest, if the grass is recouped, by looking at the grass. And I've showed this in other videos, but when the grass, think of it as you mow with a bush hog or a lawn mower, the grass becomes square. So it comes up and it's cut off square. Then it grows back and it grows back to a point. So first it will heal at that end. It was frayed at the end, and then it heals that, and then it begins to grow up, and then it will eventually grow back to a point. Once everything has grown back to a point, you've reached step one of ground healing. Step two is the growth cycles of the grass. And so grass has an age, it has a growth cycle. You can Google this and see this. It's in Salatin's books. He likes to talk about this a lot. But basically you take it from a certain stage of growth and you allow it to go back. And that usually is symbolized when looking at the grass by how many leaves are off the side. So if the cattle took the top of the grass and ate the grass down, you now look at your stem of grass, it's all got a point on it, and it has 3 leaves, the main stem up and 2 leaves off the side. That's usually when you get past the juvenile stage of grass, and grass is growing to a more mature stage of growing. So now you've reached the second stage of growth in the recoup time period. It's now past that juvenile stage in the form of grass, in the stage of growth of grass. And then the third section of have you allowed enough rest, has it recouped, would be days. Basically days are the same, you know, it's measured as a day, but we do the day measurement for the parasite load and the recouping of the manure. So you can do it by looking at manure. You can look at how much breakdown the manure patty itself had. We've got a couple here. So we'll look at them. Now I have to get down closer here, I guess. So we've got a manure patty. These are a little bit wetter than they should be, a little more sugars as we get into the fall, where we'd like to see a more pumpkin pie consistency. As we get into Thanksgiving, that's something good to think about. And so we look at those. Well, as we have time away from them, they begin to crust over. They begin to get holes in them from larvae and hopefully some dung beetles. And then they start to crack and break down and dry out. And that gives it enough time. Usually that takes 30 days in the sun, in the warmer weather, and that's enough to get rid of any parasite load or disease that could be in that manure. And so it's a time period. The third step there usually is best defined by 30 to 60 days time versus judging your manure. So you've got your grass back to a point, you've got it going to the next stage of growth or back past your juvenile stage, and then you've got enough time away that the ground can recoup because of the manure load that's on it, so the parasite load on the ground is good enough there. So what is overgrazing? Overgrazing, by definition to me, and what we follow here, is that we had to come back in and graze that portion of ground, this portion of ground here, before we met those 3 things, before our grass grew back and all those 3 things we just talked about. If you have to come back because you're out of grass, you've rotated all the way around your farm and you're back before this portion of ground met those criteria, technically you're overgrazing. But there are some other things that people talk about when it comes to overgrazing that they also claim is overgrazing. So let's get into those because I don't think they're wrong. It's just not what we define as overgrazing. So this is going to be kind of hard to see on the camera here, but you can see we've got probably 4 inches of growth over here, maybe 6. But right in this area where we're sitting here, it's really tight. It's really tight down to the ground. Now, some people would call this spot overgrazed because we had good 2-foot tall grass like we do out there in the new paddock, and they came in and they took more than a third. Some people say half. So they took more than a half. You overgrazed the paddock. And I don't think that's overgrazing. That's just a different style of grazing. Now, total grazers, okay, so where it's a different form of grazing, total grazers, they want to see that everywhere. They want to see the grass taken all the way down and stay here longer so that they don't move around as fast. And yes, it takes longer to recoup, but they get a better recoup because technically the ground has had more rest since they were back here before. Whereas if you follow the Greg Judy method, that take a third, leave a third, trample a third, that's what we're talking about today. He says if you take more than that, it's overgrazing. By definition, we don't believe that's overgrazing. It's just a different style of grazing. Now, what does that have to do with back grazing? So one reason that you don't back graze, allow your cattle to come backwards to paddocks that you had already prior grazed, is because you don't want them to overgraze, whatever overgraze is in your mind. And you can choose any of these factors for you. It doesn't really matter. You'll get the gist here in a minute, but they're grazing new grass up there. If they run out of grass, we did not give them a big enough paddock or a big enough strip if we were strip grazing, and they would come back into this section and continue to eat. That means that the start date of recoup on this grass hasn't hit yet because they're still coming back to graze it. And if you're a person who says if you take too much and go all the way down like a total grazer, you're overgrazing, technically you would be overgrazing if that's your definition. But the biggest problem is because you're allowing them to back graze, if you decide to come back around your farm, you'll get back to this portion early because it hadn't had as many days rest, many days with cows completely off of it, and then you're overgrazing in that section. So we don't back graze because we want to start the regrowth as soon as possible and not overgraze. It really doesn't matter what your definition is. It's still going to hit that overgrazing because you're allowing them to back graze so far. Now, what does all that wordy explanation and long-windedness, have to do with anything when it comes to what we're doing today? So we are allowing them, obviously, to back graze pretty far. We don't have any fences stopping them. One reason is right there is my water. Now, I have other watering points. I'm just allowing them to come to the easiest one right here next to the fence. And it's because we're in this season of the fall where the rules have changed. Okay, so let's go through those rules. So we don't want to allow them to back graze because we don't want to overgraze and come back too soon. Well, I'm not going to come back because this is the last graze of the season. We're working our way back towards the barn, and eventually I'm probably not even going to be able to graze all the good tall standing grass I have because I can't keep water from freezing out here. So I don't care if they come back a little bit because we're going to get 90 to 120 days of rest on this over the winter. So that factor is not in play. Well, the next factor of flies and parasite load isn't in a factor either because it's 30 degrees out here. It's actually like 37 or 38 right now. So we don't have problems with flies when it's in the 30s, and we don't have a problem with parasite loads when it's in the 30s. So back grazing isn't affected in that manner either. So we're not breaking any rules of why we don't back graze. And so for those reasons, in the fall like this, when it's the last graze of the season, one, we become more total grazers. We want them to take it a little lower, giving us more standing forage in front of us. That's one reason. We're not going to get regrowth no matter how much we take because we're going into winter. And we are not worried about the back grazing factors that we worry about the rest of the year. If we were grazing like this in May, we would be destroying our farm or making mistakes as far as growth and productivity and capacity on our farm. It would be a problem. But right now in the fall, we can relax a little bit. We don't have to get as stressed about back grazing. All right, so I guess the question is there any reason in the fall like this to not back graze? And I would say absolutely yes, there is. And so there are a few things. If we are putting permanent damage on our land, meaning, wallering mud holes and rutting up places, and we're getting close. So we always have a little bit of damage around our waters. It's inevitable and it's fairly good. This will be 100% recouped. I know it looks like a lot right now, or it does for me, but this will be 100% recouped come spring because we're going to be off of it for so long. We'll also throw down a little bit of seed around here. We'll clean up around all of our waters, finish cleaning fence rows, those things out here. But we're not creating damage. But if we had patches out in our pasture that look like this, one thing that I look for is lanes where calves walk. So if you've never seen those before, on an open grazing pasture, they'll have lanes where they walk the same path over and over back to the water or back to a barn, and it becomes wore down and it just doesn't grow grass there anymore, or doesn't grow as well because it's overworked. As long as you don't have anything like that out in your pasture, I'm not necessarily worried about the back grazing factor, but that is one reason that we would not back graze in the fall if we saw any area that was becoming overworked or over compacted, whatever you would like to say there. There's too much pasture damage being done. So in order to prevent that, we're going to put up a back lane. And pretty soon here, the next line, we're going to start doing that, and I'll go show you why. But I want to show you damage from, we have this shade structure that I also moved in mineral cart. Let's go look at the damage around that. And that is usually where I check for back grazing marks, because if they're ever going to lay around something, it's going to be around where the minerals and all that stuff is and the shade is. Even though it's cold, they don't lay in there very much right now. So let's look at that spot. So here you have it. This is a spot. This bright green spot was underneath that trailer right there. And then you can see the outer ring around here. That is where they were going around that trailer and laying down manure. So we moved it today, and it needed to be done probably yesterday. It was Sunday. We hauled animals to the butcher. We didn't come out here. My son came out and checked, but he's not moving that cart. And so 1, maybe 2 days too long, but it's not overly damaged. There's still grass. It's just a lot of trampled and a lot of extra manure in this one spot. Will it come back over the winter? Definitely. Not going to have a problem whatsoever over the winter. Had we done that in the spring, by the time we got back around, you would notice a difference in the growth of that area versus the rest of your pasture. It wouldn't be as prolific. Now, 3 grazings later, you're going to notice it's growing faster right there because of that manure load. But ultimately, damage-wise, we're fine. I use that as my gauge. And it's a little more than I wanted, but it's not going to harm our pasture whatsoever. So this paddock that they're in right now is the last paddock that we are going to graze like this and allow them to back graze. Once they cross that line, if you can see it, it's right here is a white stake. Once they cross that line, they're going to go up to this automatic yellow water up here, and I'll no longer need to back graze to that water, and we won't have any back grazing sections. So we're going to go ahead and we'll take the mineral cart into there, and they're going to get a larger section, a week-long paddock, and it'll be bigger. They're going to have more room to roam, more grass to eat, and they won't be able to back graze back this way, minimizing any damage that we have. The paddock that's going to suffer because of this method is the paddock that they're in right now, because everywhere else over here has had good trample, has had good grazing on it. But when they run out of good grass to put daily gains on here, we're going to immediately move them, and it means they won't take all of this section. So next spring, you'll notice that this section, this one paddock right here, will be a little bit taller, and it's going to have a little bit more dead debris though, because stuff that they don't eat now will stay standing tall unless I bush hog, and then will die over the winter, but stay standing as a dead, dry grass in the spring. Whereas out here, when it's been trampled and grazed really well, it will all grow up evenly, bright green, and you won't see hardly any of that dead grass. Now, how I'm gonna combat that so that I don't make this mistake is, once they move over, I'm gonna go through and bush hog this entire pasture and the other side where they grazed, because there's some dead stuff sticking up, and it's gonna make everything the same height over winter. It's gonna get rid of all my stuff that they won't graze, all my dead weeds that are out there, if there are any left, any brambles that are left out here, and it'll make all the pastures. Plus I'm gonna be dropping any leftover grass back down to feed my main pasture over the winter. And in the spring, everybody starts at an even competition as far as grasses grow. So my clovers, my orchard grass will pop back up and be over top of that fescue that we don't necessarily want for grazing. So there you have it. That is back grazing. We don't get super concerned about it in the fall because of the reasons why. And now you know why not to back graze and the things you should worry about when it comes to back grazing. In the spring and most of the year, all through the summer, we will allow them to back graze one paddock typically. But it's a little bit different in why we do paddocks instead of strips. Right now we're technically strip grazing because we put these squares in the field. They will graze a square at the water, which is always in the center line. My water is always in the center line of my pasture. They'll graze that square, and then they'll graze the square away from them in that lane, and they'll back graze to the square next to the water. Then when they move to the next alleyway or line, they'll graze against the water. So they don't back graze, but one day every other day, they'll get 1 day of back grazing. But that's it. We try to keep them off of grass that they are on. And I get this question all the time: how quick can grass recoup, or how quick can grass start a regrowth cycle? Well, right now in the fall, it's not going to. It's not gonna start a regrowth cycle. I'm not saying it's not gonna have any growth. We may gain another ½ inch or inch of growth on grass if we have decent weather and some rains. But in the spring and fall, or spring and summer, when it's super crucial to get off of it and stay off of it to allow regrowth, it can start growing back, start the growth, the healing cycle. That grass stem will heal over within 48 hours, especially if you get a rain. If you get a rain the day that you move them on and don't back graze, within 24 hours, that grass can heal over and start to heal that ruffled edge of the grass. So it's fairly quick, which tells you in the spring, especially when grass is booming through a flush, you never want to graze one section longer than 3 days, in my opinion, if you have the ground to move them and you want full productivity, because people open graze all the time and their grass grows, right? But if you want the most production you can get on your farm, you want a daily move, or at minimum every 3 to 4 days, to prevent the back grazing, and it maximizes your production of your grass, because within 48 hours, it can start regrowing, and you definitely don't want cattle taking bites of regrowth grass. So it'll take a week to get another inch of growth on it, and that's where you don't want them to take that bite of that brand new, freshly raised up inch of grass, the new growth. We want to keep them off of that. So that's why we don't back graze. And that also gives you the same timing for clipping. If you're thinking about clipping pastures, which I have a video on it, it looks like this, whether you should or should not clip pastures. But if you're gonna clip, you need to do it within 48 hours of moving them out. Usually I do it the same evening. I just drive the bush hog back here, I move them on, I bush hog the little spot, and we're good to go. Sometimes I'll let it go a couple days and I'll bush hog 2 lanes, but for the most part, it's within 48 hours of clipping, so that I don't cut back. I don't want to clip anything that I'm going to have good regrowth on for my productivity in my grazing as I go around my farm. There you have it, a little bit of education about what is overgrazing. I do get questions about that from time to time, and you know, people are a little bit different, which tells you that you don't have to be overcritical of yourself when you're talking about that. As long as you're giving good rest, you'll be fine with overgrazing. Minimum of 30 days. Once you're off of it, stay off of it for a minimum of 30 days. And then hopefully I adequately, and I didn't talk too much about back grazing, the importance of not back grazing. You can back graze a little bit, but don't back graze too much because you're gonna have that growth coming back before you're able to get off of it, and that's always a bad sign. It will cut your grass back. It will stunt the growth of your grass. Now, obviously, here in the fall, I gave you reasons why you don't have to be overly critical on yourself, and it's not as important. So it's not a cookie cutter answer. The seasons and how the grass grows determines when you can or should not back graze. And that's why I say you should spend more efforts into learning about growing grass than you should focus on cattle and breeds of cattle and all the other things that come along with this. You should put more of your education, more of your focus, more of your thought process in to growing the best pastures you can, and that will ensure you're highly successful when it comes to small farm and homestead raising of cattle. Hope that video helped you. Thanks for watching. Until next time, have a good one.